Right. Welcome to the Big Story Podcast. I'm Alex Morrissey, and today we have the amazing, incomparable, add other adjectives that you wish. Gabriel Hartman is here to join us and talk. So let's get into this. Gabriel, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. I always usually have a little bit of conversation with people before the show starts, and it's like always this lively, jumpy thing. We have a good time, and then we get into the show, and it's great. And I find myself referring back to previous conversations, and we were talking about how like cool is like a timely thing, and we were both saying how like we think like, is it time to get out of where we live because like is the cool gone? And when you were talking about it, I was thinking like I lived in New York City for 25 years, like in Manhattan.
Right. Yeah, and I lived there for when I was, from when I was like 16 to 22 or something like that. Like New York defined a lot for me.
Yeah. And it's this thing where you go like, and you were saying how like, in LA, like how where you live, it's like now it's like super expensive and like wealthy land. And it's like everywhere, like I feel like we're like, this age group where like, we got in when the getting was good at some things, but the only way to retain that is to sort of be like a shut-in and like, you're never moving. You're like,
yeah, well, right. And I mean, I ended up, I moved to, my ex-wife and I moved to the east side of Los Angeles when like 13 years ago. We were kind of talking about this before, but and it's, it was an up and coming area, it was a little dodgy and stuff. And, but I liked it that way. There were, there was an influx of interesting people and stuff, but not too much and not, and then it went into kind of a hyper gentrified thing. And now it's just like rich people live over here. And, but I did end up just selling my house recently,
congratulations.
Cheers. But it's like, but it totally brings up the part of, do I buy another house in this ridiculous area, or do I do the thing that we were talking about a little bit, be like, artist Donald Judd and move to a tiny town in the middle of nowhere like Marfa, Texas, and decide to make it into someplace I'm entertaining messianic ideas of moving to some tiny town in the Midwest or something and transforming it into someplace else.
Well, I think with all the sort of cinematic work that you do, like I would think like you'd find like some sort of like desert town and turn it into some like sort of modern mashup of like yojimbo and like a science fiction world all kind of clash together in this town. And like everything, for some reason, you have to get at like 2 feet off the ground to look at things.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to go the Yojimbo route, in that I'm not going to have to like be the lone guy between two warring factions of gangsters for the rest of my life. But I can imagine it going that way, though, if you try to move into some tiny desert town.
Right, now, exactly, because there were people there before you, and they don't.
Yes, exactly. And then I come in, and I'm like, hey, I'm a storyboard artist from a big town, and I'm here to change this place. I'm here to bring some culture to you people.
All of a sudden you hear a guitar going ding, 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 and you're like, okay. Although isn't the job as a comic book artist for many years the job of the man caught between two rivaling gangs?
Well, I mean, it would be, well, in that, you mean Marvel and DC? Or I mean, yes and no, because I did have an earlier career in comics when I was like a teenager, back when I did live in New York City. And then for many years, I was just a storyboard artist for movies, and then came back to comics like a dozen years ago. And I did work for Marvel, maybe a little work for DC, but the majority of the stuff that I ended up doing was, a book for Image Comics, other stuff that's, where I would just, because I'm not in no way, especially in comics, because I also have this other movie career. Like in comics, I've never been a careerist. I've always just done the things that I wanted to do, which is it's not the path to, everybody loving you, but it's the path to, I mean, comics are just not, I feel like comics can be such a direct expression, like you don't need, everything that you need to make a film or whatever else. So, I mean, in theory, I can do it all by myself, and I have at times. And I just don't feel like it's worth it to sacrifice in order to get someplace I don't really want to be.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a point where I did a lot of fun comics at Marvel, mostly written by my friend Jeff Parker, who's great. And then I did another series that with a different writer that was allegedly sort of a step up and, whatever. And it was such a horrendous experience that then I was just like, yeah, I'm literally never working with another writer again. And I'm only going to work, write stuff on my own. I wrote stuff with, with my ex-wife as well. And, a lot of stuff together, but it just was a thing where I could, where it's not worth it in the world of comics, right? Comics should be about doing, the barrier to entry is relatively low. It should be about doing stuff that you're passionate about for me.
No, I agree. And I think we have I think now the awareness of the sort of the two sides of comics is pretty clear. There is this sort of the sitcom, procedural version of comic books, which is the monthlies that we all, cut our teeth on as children reading. And they're near and dear to our hearts in so many ways because great work was done. There's no way to deny that. But then there is this sort of passion project side of comic books. And I'm not just referring to indie comic books, period. I'm talking to like A-list creators who are like, you know what, I really, really want to do this thing. And it's not a matter of like, is this going to pay my car off? It's a matter of like, is this the story that I want to tell?
Yeah. But success can be defined in a weird way through comics, especially because of childhood perceptions of what's important. Right. Sure. So like you can fool yourself right into, to pursuing something at one of those two big companies that you feel like would pay off these childhood feelings, but ultimately you're just not actually getting paid that well and not actually having a lot of creative control over the thing you're doing. So it can be a little bit of a trap too.
The blush does wear off quickly in many respects if you are kind of paying attention to the situation over there. And I'm not knocking it. Like I went the route. Like I did the whole thing. I did the song and the dance. And I worked for those companies and I really enjoyed what I did, but it wasn't. But to your point, it wasn't the thing that I don't sit back and think like, boy, I'd love to get a penciling gig for Marvel or DC and be like, no, I want to write a story, and maybe I want to draw the story, or maybe I just want to write the story.
Well, I mean, for me, it is about writing and drawing the thing, and a little bit this is to my detriment as far as the careerist thing goes, because writers just get a level of respect in comics that is disproportionate, it is both writing and drawing the thing is telling the story. Both things are inextricable, right? They're both storytelling. Yeah. And so, I mean, if I pursued more writing for other people, I think that it would give a level of respect. But whereas you could work at a comic book store and show up and write something, and all of a sudden you're a writer. But but being an artist who writes, there's always this level of
it's like
as if it's you're kind of indulgent or whatever. And I always get questions like, so do you just draw out the scripts or whatever? It's like, no, I write, I type them. I write full scripts and submit them to the editor. That's literally what I do. It's like there's a weird barrier for getting past that idea.
I know it's true because we get a wide gamut of creators on the show, and lots of plenty of the of indie creators, and but it's funny, a lot of them do. They're in that they work in that point where they sit down with a piece of paper and they will start thumbnailing out their story. Like they'll be thinking,
right. Well, but I could do that too, and I have done that too on indie books, right? I mean, like on books that are just. I mean, I did a graphic novel, which is like my most personal thing. It's a graphic novel called Kinski. It's a very it's not it's not a genre thing exactly. I mean, it is kind of a suspense crime thing, but a kind of quirky, weird one. And I did do that in a more organic way where I just outlined it and, and I had a big idea for, I knew where it was going, but it was more about finding it, and it was driven visually to some extent, but only because I have the whole thing in my head and I don't have to talk to anybody about it. I mean, when you're doing a freelance book, you're working for this company, you have an editor, and me, I want to protect myself for later on if I'm doing one of those things. I want to write a full script so that I'm saying exactly what I'm going to be doing, so that there's not ambiguity where people can come back and go, oh, but what about this and what about that? I mean, I'm managing situations like that are always about like making sure that I can carve out a space where I can tell the story I want to tell and get the least amount of like non-helpful interference.
And how do you, I mean, like, and I totally get that, because like I do a lot of design work for a lot of different companies and brands. And I find that like there's a lot of work that you have to do to sort of like, protect your own creative space in these things. And I'm not saying that like, because the work isn't an art project. It's, it's a design project, and it's a commercial enterprise. But like, I remember asking, Kennedy from Wyden and Kennedy when he was speaking at the school I was teaching, and I said, so what's your number one job? This is after he'd already written Just Do It, so he was, they had a big, organization, and he goes, oh, my number one job is to protect my creative creative workers, so they can actually have the freedom to do the things that they need to do versus have to fight with this sort of exterior pressures.
Right.
And I think like if you aren't part of an enterprise with somebody doing that for you, it's your responsibility to kind of make that space for yourself. So like doing that full script is a safety valve, because they're not going to go like, oh, well, wait a minute, we thought you were going to put Thanos in this thing later in the story because we talked about that. And you're like, it wasn't part
or just there, I mean, there was one particular company that had a guy in charge who would have ideas about things that that didn't necessarily fit with previous plans. So I like laying low and trying to do the work and trying to carve out a space to do the work. But that said, my actual interactions at DC and Marvel with editors have always been pretty positive, have really been positive. I've not actually run into really difficult situations along those lines, but I'm also somebody who's worked in movies with very powerful directors and a lot of politics for my entire adult life. So it's not like I have no idea how to like navigate.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've obviously, that's a very different kind of cauldron to be in, but it's one where there are so many personalities and they're all running at the same time, that you are happy, because it's not like an editor has to kind of wait for something to come in, but like that director there's so many things happening, and the art department, like all these people are standing there going, hey,
yeah. Well, and it can work all kinds of ways too. Yeah. But but like certainly the the navigating the politics of people is a thing, and also. There was a thing in where I was going to go back to Marvel and do a book, and it was pitched and it was approved and everything, but it was assigned to an editor who just didn't get it and wasn't helpful on a level where I ended up just not doing the book because it wasn't worth it. Like there is a point where it's kind of like you're going to draw a 6-issue, and these were like 30-page issues, so that's a lot of work, and it was and that's a giant chunk of your life, and at a certain point you're just going to go, is it worth it for this? Like, maybe not, but some things are, some things aren't. The Green Lantern Earth 1 book that I did at DC, like we did 2 volumes of it. I'm very happy with that. I loved working with Christy Quinn, our editor. It was like there's a lot of personal shit in that book, and there's a lot of good stuff in it. And it's not, and it is a story that I was interested in telling, but also oddly I wasn't like, a Green Lantern super fan who was living out some sort of, fantasy doing it. It was looking at what they had and going, this is something where I can explore this world in an interesting way.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's I think that sentiment is the key sentiment to so much of the comic books that we all love, because nobody was touching Daredevil, and Frank Miller was like, what are you guys doing with that? And they're like, nothing. He's like, you guys mind letting me have a handle at that? Yeah, sure. We don't care. And and so many comic books that we ended up just going, these are the greatest things ever done, are a result of those moments when, you know, someone had no idea to do something
Right.
with someone, and that space, man, like that, you know, Moon Knight is a result of someone looking at, you know, a comic from 1975 saying like, it'd be kind of cool if I did something like this. And
Yeah.
then next thing you know, we get some of the greatest, you know, evolution in comics from, you know, Bill Sienkiewicz's, you know, Here I Am, and I love Neil Adams, to Here I Am, and your mind's blown. You know, I mean, it was
Yeah.
just,
And, you know, you give the example of Daredevil, and I'm sure people will argue with me about this, but, and, you know, obviously Gene Colan did a run on Daredevil. He's my favorite artist ever, right? But at the same time, I don't know if anybody loved Daredevil before all of that, right? Before
oh,
Frank Miller and everything, right?
oh,
So, like, you know, uh, and it is about going, hey, what's a story that I can tell, you
yeah,
know, with this thing? And, you know, the generation previous to them, you know, who created a lot of this, all this stuff and everything, they didn't come to any of this with
yeah.
sentimental ideas about being children growing up reading these characters.
It was a
They, you know,
job.
yeah.
It was purely a job, and it wasn't
And
until,
they still did great work, though.
oh,
That's what
for
I'm saying.
sure.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's, you know, because the creativity is the creativity. It doesn't matter sort of how you apply it. You know, they're going to they would have told the great story of Daredevil their own way had they come in the second generation. You know, you know, so funny. So the Gene Colan thing. So he was our instructor when we were in art college, and technically it was the inking class. You know, and like I don't, you know, who had the bad foresight to say Gene Colan is the
Yeah.
inking
Okay.
class,
All right.
and I don't know if it was day one or day two or whatever it was, Gabriel, but he like rolls in with a stack of printouts and just hands them out to everyone and goes, and like we were all supposed to have like vellum or something. And he's like, okay, so, you know, the assignment is to ink over me for the, and bring in like, and we're like,
This is like the world's hardest job. Like, it's the hardest job in comics would be inking Gene Colan, which
he's like, Tom Palmer's my favorite inker. I'm like, man, like Tom Palmer's a great inker and he still can't ink you well.
yeah,
Like, I mean, it's impossible.
it's near impossible. I've actually tried. You know, he's one of those, you know, people where I've found, you know, found photocopies, found, you know, things that were intended to be inked, not necessarily
Right.
stuff that he drew to be, you know,
Reproduced
in pencils, but like and tried to ink them and tried to do it, and it certainly is a challenge. And I also have a kind of I also feel like I could almost do it. Like, it's something where like I feel like I'm not, you know, I'm not a slickster, you know, I'm not
Right.
somebody, you know, I like expressiveness and I like to just go with it. And I feel like I could almost get there. I would love, if there's a nerdy thing that I would love, it would be to, like, you know, for there to be some, you know, Gene Colan penciled story sitting in a drawer somewhere that you know, that I could not ink on those pages, but like,
yeah.
you know, you know, that I could ink that, you know, and like try to really do it. Because it's like inking some pinup or whatever, that's fine, but that's not really the job, right? The job is doing the whole thing. The job is telling the story. So like, you know, the sequential story. So like that, I feel like that would be a super fun challenge. I know I would fail, but I still would be a super fun challenge.
Well, dude, that makes me totally think like, wow, how cool would it be? Like, what, you know, we all love music, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you got Kurt Weill hanging over your shoulder in the background. Like, we all love music, and music is so integral to like part of the creative process, whatever the thing you do. I mean, everybody has their sort of link to music. But one thing we love about music is we love covers. We love bands that we love. I mean, play the song of another thing that we love, and we're like, it's amazing, because that it's like it's pre-mashup. It's this sort of like mesh up, you know, like, but like, how cool would it be to, like, I don't know, Marvel or DC, like once a year put out like a really deluxe edition comic book that's a cover album or a cover of that, by taking the pencils of a Gene Colan thing and then having a different crew finish this thing up. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but it's also like, I mean, there are things out there right now. I mean, I know that you know, I mean, I'm not sure how much legit. Maybe Rob Liefeld was doing some version of this or something. I don't know, but but like I know that there's something out there where people, there's some guy who's commissioned different artists to redraw pages of the Dark Knight Returns, you know, and like, you know, just do their interpretation of each page. And it's like that, you know, I mean, that would be a bizarre thing to do. But I mean, like, but at the same time, look, hear me out. there's like there's also in along your cover song thing, right? There's the thing where somebody takes a song that's not the greatest song in the world and makes it something amazing, right? It's like the Bob Dylan song "Shot of Love," not the greatest Bob Dylan song in the world. PJ Harvey covers it, and it sounds like it's the most amazing song in the world, right? So cover version of of not the greatest comic in the world, where you go back and try to try to bring it up to something that's
really interesting. And where do we start? Do we start with the color? Do we start with the artwork, or do we start with the story itself? I mean,
I don't know, because those things are kind of inextricable, and this would just end up being a completely different comic, so it wouldn't actually work out,
But I think what it is, it's an interesting thought experiment. It's like one of those kind of things. Well, how do you, like, this is us in grad school coming up with this idea. Now, how do we execute this idea to like really, make it have the impact? Is this a traveling show that we go into museums around the country with, different artists applying whatever to whatever? But by the way, any Jeff Buckley cover, any cover of Jeff Buckley did of other people's songs, A+.
Yeah.
A+. Okay, so you said an interesting thing. New York City, 16 to 22. Okay, so what's that? How did you get in?
Well, so I graduated from high school early, not for good reasons, not because I was like a genius, but I just had a slight. I went to a college, or I went to a high school that was what out here they would now call like a magnet school or something. Like, it was an arts oriented high school.
Okay.
So like for half of the day I just had a fine art education. So I had gotten a lot of, kind of college level art education throughout, from when I was 14 on. And then well, I guess really just 14 to 16, because that's when I moved. So I don't know. All this stuff seems like it took a lot longer than it did. And but also had, also ended up kind of getting expelled from there, and going to an alternative school where it was like a sort of work at your own pace thing. So I was just like, okay, well, what if I just worked really fast and got done with high school as quickly as humanly possible? So I did that. Was able to kind of get some scholarship to go to School of Visual Arts for, but like just local scholarship stuff. I had no money. I didn't grow up with any money.
Right.
And so but it was only enough to cover like a semester. But I went, right, and I only went for the semester. I didn't have enough money to go further than that, but it was also kind of remedial. I went for fine arts, which is also something I'm very interested in, And
I mean, you're 7 years younger than me, so 16.
It's like 90, 91.
Okay, so that's like my senior year at SVA. So I was there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, but I was going for fine arts, right? And it's not a great place to go for fine arts anyway. But
that was the year that John Paul Leon.
Yeah.
That was his first year.
Okay. Well, I basically, I did that kind of minimal introductory stuff, and because I was. By the time I was actually, I was 16 when I moved up there, but I was 17 by the time I was going to the classes and stuff. So but it felt, I'd already been through years of this stuff in high school, and it just felt utterly remedial. It felt like the other kids in the class were just they were, the kind of best artists from their high school, coming together, whatever. And I was like, and they hated me because when there would be critique stuff, I would critique the work, right? And I could take it when people critique my work because I'd already been through all this stuff, and they hated me. And and also I was a fucking 17-year-old, can I curse? I'm sorry.
Of course.
I'm sure that I was insufferable.
Yeah.
So but it was just those two things together, that it wasn't really I didn't feel like I was getting a ton out of it, but if I had the patience and stayed and figured out a way to stay, I'm sure I would have. But I ended up just dropping out. I got get a job as a museum guard at the Guggenheim Museum through a weird set of circumstances. I was still 17. I got when I got the job and turned 18. the woman who did the hiring was extraordinarily nearsighted. So like she held up my what do you call it, application, and just looked at it, like, and was like, okay, yeah, sure, you're hired. And there was no process whatsoever for hiring the security guards to guard these all these crisis works of art. Yeah. So and so I did that for like 9 months or whatever. But that whole time, from the time I was 14 years old, I started doing sequential samples and sending them into companies. Right. Okay. I got a copy of Artist Market, this book from back then that that would like list submissions, editors, and things like that. And so like and they were terrible when I was 14, right? But I consistently did this where I would make up sequential samples, send them to the companies, sometimes get feedback, and eventually it just kind of paid off. So like that era, right after I was in, school, I just focused on trying to get work in comics. And since I was in New York City, there was a little more accessibility there. Mm-hmm. And I would just over and over send the samples. And eventually a guy at DC Comics called Neil Posner, who was submissions editor. Yeah. He guy who was really good for me in that he was he was encouraging but harsh, right? Like he was not he didn't suffer fools at all. Yep. And so like he ended up getting me a little, like through him I got a little thing where it was like an internship with Dick Giordano. Okay. For that, and then that was supposed to get me work at DC, which it didn't because he was retiring, so no one cared about him anymore, right? So like nobody, none of the editors there thought that they could curry favor by hiring some kid that he was mentoring.
There was a group of for lack of a better term, of the old timers at DC mm-hmm. at that period. Joe Orlando, Dick Giordano, Bob Rozakis, like there was a crew, from the 60s and 70s that were still part of the family who they weren't in the editorial gene pool. They were given these titles and offices sort of off to the side, and mm-hmm. they weren't even really truly even special projects people, because they like the special projects people, they would always take your work and go, oh, we should go talk to so-and-so in special projects and see about getting you some work, and that was
right. But this was Dick Giordano was the executive editor of some kind at that point. Sure. So like and actually that wasn't the first dealing I had with DC. The first dealing was when I was 16, I think, and in Florida, my mom had played tennis with Erwin Hazen, who I believe was he taught at SVA as well, right?
My fellow co-host Phil, he took Erwin's class.
Yeah. And so like I ended up, when I went to New York, and I ended up going and meeting with him and showing him my samples that I had at that point, and he was like, "These are pretty good. I'm going to get my friend Joe Orlando on the phone, right?" And he called up Joe Orlando. I'm 16. He's like, he's like, I got this kid here I think you could take a look at, right? Mm-hmm. And they made an appointment. So they were still at the 666 building, and so I schlepped up to Joe Orlando's office and showed my portfolio, and he was basically kind of like, look, kid, you got a lot to learn, it was really like in my mind, he was charming a cigar. He wasn't really.
Yeah.
And, but the main thing I remember is he had an Alex Raymond original strip on the wall. Wow, okay, he kind of took me over to it, and he was like, "Now look what Raymond did here," and blah blah blah, right? And and at the time, I'm just like, "Oh, this guy isn't going to give me anything," but it was a good to be thrown into that at that age. I think was a positive.
Gabriel, this is so funny because I had nearly the identical experiences in this thing. When I was 15 to 16ish years old, the memories keep falling apart in this one, but so somebody knew somebody who knew somebody at DC, and they set up a meeting for me. Maybe I had to call him, but with Bob Rozakis at DC. So I went in with my portfolio when I was in high school, maybe as a junior, maybe, I don't know, sophomore. And I go in with dreams of being the next big hotshot artist, because I like Art Adams. And I go in, and Bob gives me this nearly the same sort of rundown that you got with Joe, who Joe was our teacher at SVA as well.
Yeah.
And man, that guy, like, you got a lot to learn, kid. His whole routine was you would pick an image from like a magazine or newspaper, and you had to draw a triptych. What happened right before, what happened right after.
Yeah, okay.
Put it up on the wall. Joe would just walk down the line and go, saleable, not saleable. And he would just do that the whole way. And then that's like, and then if you had the temerity to say like why or what, then he would engage with you. But otherwise, like most people would just be like, oh, okay, and that would be it. But like, he was great because he would like give you every little bit of info you needed to know if you pursued it. And then my really close friend Eric Dozier, he works for Gearbox, so he does like game characters design and stuff for Gearbox. He did the same thing that you did and spoke to Joe when he was in high school, and Joe looked after Eric. He went to school, and when he got out of SVA, like Joe was like swooped him right up into special projects and like made Eric's career. Just had he had a great life and career, never having to do comic books. He just did special projects, had a great time. So it's interesting, but like, those are really like, but it's making those connections and like, the human to human thing. And they'll always talk to someone, especially who's young, who has the chutzpah, to get in there and do it, because so many people don't. Like it's a vetting process in its own right. But
yeah, I think that the chutzpah was not warranted in the work that I did, but it was, but I mean, it was not terrible. I mean, I did get professional work by the time I was 18, I guess. So like, I did back then I worked under a different name.
I know.
Perhaps I sometimes admit this and sometimes don't. And and so like and so I did a book called War Machine at Marvel when, and that was the first the War Machine #1 was the first published work that I ever did.
So, and who were you trying to protect at the time?
It was like, no, the key to this is I started submitting these things when I was 14, 15 years old. Right. So I was not making good decisions. And and this was sometime when I was like 15, I got super into the Velvet Underground.
Okay.
And then like Warhol's Factory and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so this is like they all go there and and change their names and to something poppy and stupid sounding, right? And so that's what I did. And
Gabriel Ramon could have been Gabriel Ramon.
Yeah, it was like I say, bad decisions. So but then by the time I'd kept submitting stuff under that name. Then all these people knew me as that name,
right?
And then whatever. Now it's good because that's work I did as a teenager,
right.
and I had a colossally bad fit for an inker and through most of that work. The inkers that I was paired with were not serving the pencils at all.
Super tough.
But particularly on that War Machine book. Yeah. And everything got kind of flattened out and terrible looking, and so and that was what people thought of as my work, and it was an enormously frustrating situation. But looking back now, I'm like, does anybody want to be like to have to account for the work that they did when they were 18 years old? No. So I have a huge out, and that some other guy did that, right? And and we can all pretend like that's the case, and and I have this other career is the one that's really me.
It was a brilliant idea when you were 14.
Yes, exactly. It only worked out that way in the most circuitous fashion, but yeah.
That's hilarious. I love it. It's such a great sort of like sidebar to in your own life. It's like, oh yeah, the whole thing. So was there any you're hustling and looking for work, your late teens and early 20s. Was there any sort of like consideration, like, or did you go back for any further education or did you say
no, because I've only, I've just been I've been a working freelancer, nonstop since I was 18 years old. I've never after that job where I was the security guard at the Guggenheim for like 8 months. I've never had a job that wasn't visual storytelling in some way. right?
Wow.
And so like writing or drawing or whatever, or a little bit, directing, film stuff and everything, right? So like, like that's been my whole life. That's all I've ever done since I was 18 years old. So,
Wow.
and I've never had, look, but there've been tons of times over those years where I've been like, I wish I could have had, had the time and the space to have like more, fine art education, more illustration education, more, go to film school and sit around and just talk shit about like film process and theory in a way that I never had the opportunity to in actually working in movies where most people don't actually care about film.
Yeah.
So, it's a like I've plenty of times wished that I could have had that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is, listen, it's a mad luxury, especially to go off and go to art school.
Mhm.
I mean, it's possibly the most impractical sort of like thing that one person can do. And
But I mean, granted, I didn't actually go to art school, but I mean, I've made a living off of
yeah,
doing stuff that you would, in theory, be trained for if going to art school.
exactly.
So,
And I mean, and for me, like, it was one of those things. I mean, even the classes that they forced you to take, your art history classes, whatever. I mean, I can distinctly remember being, in my jobs as like an art director somewhere, and somebody starts talking about something, I go like, if we did the blah, 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 blah from the blah, blah, blah period, we might actually be
yeah,
able to incorporate that. And people go like, and then you get an image and you pass it over and they go, oh, that's perfect. And you
right.
go, okay.
Also, though, like when I was like maybe 15 years old, I had an art history class in the high
Oh,
school.
that's cool. Right.
My teacher was this woman, Rona Glasser. She's passed away since, but she like probably in a way the most influential person on me because like she both steered me in the direction of looking at she was like, okay, this kid can draw. What steered me in the direction of looking at great draftsmen from the past, right? Which still is hugely influential for me, but even more so uh, in the art history class, she was like, you can't just like or not like something for no reason. You have to have reasons and you have to be able to think critically. And like she used the art history class as an excuse to teach us to think critically, or at least me.
Yeah.
And like that is probably like the single most influential thing in my life. So, or, in a lot of in some way, because it's so broad and it's about so much stuff. And
It's
it's
a core
about
skill.
the way you approach everything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's you
Yeah.
and as an artist, as a storyteller, you're constantly approaching stuff and going, is this, is this working or not working, and applying a set of criteria to that that if you were just like, hey, I like this, then it would just be indulgent,
Wait, you sound like a client right now when you say, hey, I like this, or I don't like this.
Yeah, right,
No,
exactly.
it's wretchedly painful in that respect, because it's one of those things where but I mean, if you don't have that, you're a victim of your own skill sets, like you really
Yeah.
to have that, because what is this serving the needs? And you need to know that, oh, am I getting derivative here? Like you really have to kind of understand it through critical thinking. And that's where what you were talking about, the idea of, when you critique your work, I mean, that's part of the critical thinking process,
Yeah.
defend your goddamn work,
Yeah.
because not just because you think it looks cool, like there needs to be like
Yeah,
thought.
and but I mean, there certainly as a creative person, there's a difficult line to walk there where it is important to be really hard on the work that you do,
Yeah.
but you can also obviously, as many of us do, fall into deep self-loathing. So like being able to walk that line is important as well.
I wasn't really going at myself in that respect, but yeah, no, you're right. I mean, let's be kind to ourselves.
Yes.
Is an important thing, important skill set as well. So, I mean, so in the terms of influence, like, I mean, you cited Gene as an influence, and
Hmm.
and I can totally get it when I think about, like, when I look at the work, how you put blacks down on a page, like I can see how because Gene, man, like he would just throw it down. I mean, I would say more than 50% of his pages had blacks on them. He was just so bold in that respect. But like, what other sort of influences, like, I mean, even as a kid, like I found that the influences from, the early on are the ones that came back and really had a stronger impact as a sort of air quote mature artist.
Right. I mean, I don't. I mean, I think that. Well, just to address the Gene Colan of it all. I mean, in some ways, it's about that aesthetic part of it, but it's also about his storytelling, which I know some people have like run down, like it's not clear or it's not, whatever, like utter nonsense to me. Like I think that that like his ability to like both tell the story but tell it in a charismatic way
Mhm.
where he's putting the camera in places that elicit emotion in a way that that's one of the biggest things to me.
Yeah,
Like,
drama.
how do you present something dramatically? What's the best place for that camera to be? How do you elicit emotion while still getting across clarity, and sometimes not clarity, when that's effective as a way to tell the story, and like all of the things are on the table. So a narrow idea of clarity equals greatness or whatever, when not in a flashy way, but in that kind of old fashioned comics way of just knowing exactly what's going on all the time is
Yeah.
the most important thing. That wasn't what Gene Colan was about.
No.
And I think that's the most important thing about his stuff for me. But and obviously the dynamics of it, but the dynamics were very different than the other dynamics of Marvel stuff.
Sure.
And but other influences, I mean, I did certainly have influence was like those standard sort of I'm 47 years old, George Perez, obviously, who just passed away, huge influence on me as a kid. And but at the same time, like there's a point around that sort of 14 15 time where I found back issues of the 60s Doom Patrol that was drawn by this guy Bruno Premiani,
Okay.
and who was I believe he's Argentinian, but he'd kind of like, no, I'm not entirely sure. I'm maybe I don't want to like say stupid things here, but he was, but I know that he ended up having to flee fascism and ended up in the U.S. and he was much more skilled. He wrote a textbook on how to draw horses, right?
Okay.
And his skill set was much higher than doing a low selling book at DC Comics, right?
Right.
And I didn't understand that when I was just picking up these books. I was like, there's something about this that really speaks to me.
Yeah.
And so that Bruno Premiani ended up being like an enormous influence on me. And I totally recommend everybody go track down the, like the 60 Doom Patrol stuff. And there's scattered other things that, that he drew. But he had a kind of illustrative quality to the art. He inked his own stuff.
Wow.
So there was a kind of, there's a real weight and, to the work, and loved the way he drew animals because it turned out he had written a textbook on drawing horses. So he was just, I think that ultimately what I was responding to and didn't know was that he was just coming at this from a very different direction than other guys at the time.
Yeah, and that's interesting because like I think in retrospect, a lot of the comic book artists that sort of have that heavy sort of hit on you, even though you may not like at the time recognize the value of it, are the ones who come from the outside of the industry, even though they're doing it at a very high level, but it's not like everybody else's, So like for me, like, and it was really weird. I was in art school at the time, and I remember having a conversation with a fellow student of mine, and we were talking comic book artists, and he named somebody who I had tons of their comics and was the single greatest influence to me really as a comic book artist, but I didn't even recognize it. And that was Michael Golden. And I had no idea. Like, and which I'm glad we had that conversation because it changed the course of my life in so many ways. But it was really like, oh, you're right. Like this was the thing that I had responded to. I mean, sure, I loved my X-Men and my George Perez Titans and his Avengers, et cetera, and so forth. But they were just more superhero comic books. They were great superhero comic books, but they weren't this separate thing that I would seek out. Like I'm like, oh, what is that? Why is that this thing? And there's this other sort of like, I don't know, splinter, like I try to like create channels in my head of like the sort of the origin stories of styles and how they sort of filter out, you know, and there's this like there's this whole channel that comes like from whatever was post Mazzucchelli, you know, like
Yeah.
there's a huge school of wonderful artists who have just come from that vein. And Mazzucchelli's like, it's got this big chunk of like, you know, the European, you know, illustrators mixed with a good dose of Toth, you know, and
Oh yeah.
putting in there. And it's like, you know, so then you get like the sort of that from that post Toth Mazzucchelli thing, you get the Michael Larks and these, you know, these amazing artists who just, you know, exploding with style and weight and, you know, and yeah. So
One thing for me, when we're talking about these influences, like one thing for me is that I need to have, you know, art around me. I need to have art books around me. I have, you know, art, you know, I have, you know, original art up on the walls in my studio, but by other people, obviously. And you know,
this is fantastic.
yeah, look how great this is. But like, I try not to specifically reference things. I want the general sense of influence and not, you know, and not like, and not go so deep with, you know, being influenced by somebody in particular. Obviously, there are still things though that, you know, Jorge Zafino, you know, like the one Conan issue he did, and the, you know, and some stuff like that, you know, that are touchstones where if I feel like I have nothing, you know, that I can look at that and go, yeah, but he did this, you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's, I mean, it's interesting. We were talking with Adam Gorham, not just recently, and I think what it is like, it's easy to look at something and say, okay, cool, I want to do that, you know, and you can kind of get hooked into that world. But I think to do it successfully and not sort of be a cover band, you know, in that sense, is what you can do is you can look for the sort of the underlying, I call it mathematics. That's just how my brain works. But what's the mathematics? What's the algebra that solves the equations of this artwork? Because the artist is solving a problem. How do I solve this problem? Whether it's the layout, the structuring, the layering, the application of blacks, the rendering, whatever these things are, how do they do that? Because and the storytelling aspect, and if you can kind of break that kind of stuff down, you can throw that into the sort of the supercomputer of your subconscious with other solutions, and what will eventually come out will be this, you know, those
you
know.
I just try not to think about the specifics too much past the point of just appreciating it in the first place, you know, and just let it live in my head as a kind of stew, and just do things in a way that are, obviously I'm analytical about the way that I tell stories, but I don't but I try not to be, my brain just doesn't work that way. And I don't like things to feel like they're overtly influencing it. And I just want to like express the stuff in a sort of intuitive way. It's both intuitive and it's analytical at the same time.
Yeah. So what's the jump from doing comic books, you know, or somebody else doing comic books using your body back in the early
whoever that guy was,
90s?
That guy actually he lives somewhere in the Midwest now. He's involved in regional theater, as I understand it. And the Gabriel Gecko, he's got a whole life going on. But go ahead.
I'm happy to hear that. So how long was that period? And then like, how did you say, like, how did like storyboarding come into the sort of the circle of work for you?
Well, movies, filmmaking, all this had always been equally important to me.
Okay.
Right. And so I was a deep film nerd when I first moved to New York. One of the first things I bought was Hitchcock Truffaut, the interview book where Francois Truffaut interviews Alfred Hitchcock, and the things that Hitchcock talked about as far as storytelling goes, as visual storytelling goes, were equally as important as anything else. You know, comics and stuff. And I always felt like, you know, there is a very boring conversation about storyboards versus comics and whatever. But the broader ideas of storytelling could be applied to these things in different ways that fit the medium. And, you know, and I learned a lot from that Hitchcock book. And then, you know, pursuing other stuff like that. Hitchcock is still my favorite director. But so when what happened though was the industry tanked in the mid 90s, right? Like, as I was going along, there was a speculator boom, and the industry collapsed, and there just wasn't that much work out there. But I had moved to Los Angeles, not being able to afford to live in New York. I moved to Los Angeles with an idea that that I could conceivably do storyboards, right?
Okay.
And but I put no effort into that whatsoever. And I moved out here. I did some work for Malibu Comics that still existed at the time,
Hank Canals.
I knew Hank from back then. Still know Hank. And then that dried up because of Marvel bought them. But kind of coincidentally, I ended up getting my first job doing storyboards right at that time. It was just dumb luck. I dumb lucked into randomly meeting a guy who knew an agent who represented storyboard artists when I was at the Bookstar in Studio City, California, waiting in line to get a book signed by Mark Frost, the co-creator of Twin Peaks.
Wow.
So, and so I ended up just talking to this guy in line, and and he was like, "Well, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm drawing comics, but it's kind of, the industry's kind of falling apart, and I'm looking into doing some storyboards." I'd made no effort whatsoever, and so and he was like, "Oh, well, I know an agent who represents storyboard artists. I'll give him, your number or whatever." So then next day, you call that guy. That guy's like, "Well, bring me over some samples," which I have, of course, done no samples. Right? This is the opposite of my comics thing where I was doing them constantly. And so that night I was just like, well, I better draw some storyboard samples. So I did. I basically just bullshitted this sequence that I'd been a guard at the Guggenheim, so I had spent a lot of time standing around thinking while in the Guggenheim. And so I always sort of imagined some action set piece set in the rotunda of the Guggenheim. And so that's what I did. I just kind of bullshitted out this action sequence set in the Guggenheim with whatever, and did that overnight. Took it, met with this guy. The guy was like, "Yeah, I think I could get you some work," and then got me a commercial, which actually the first commercial I did was the worst professional experience I've ever had in my life, and I thought that I would never, that storyboards were not for me, and I was never going to do any more of them. But then I did a little more, and then got the first feature film that I did, which was a completely different experience than the crass, horrible world of working on commercials. So once I got into this more creative world of things, it all went a lot better. And I totally dumb lucked into it. Like, I remember going to the San Diego Comic-Con the next year after the industry had collapsed, and running into people, and they were desperate and whatever. And I was just like, I'm making more money than I've ever made in my life. I don't know what to say. They're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, I'm storyboarding this movie called Austin Powers. It's like Mike Myers is in it and stuff, right? That it was a dumb luck transition, and then I ended up doing storyboards exclusively for 10 years, which burnt me out a little bit in that direction too.
Well, it's interesting because at that time also, that's when the Los Angeles animation television world was cherry picking all the comic book artists away at San Diego. So you go into San Diego and you'd hang out. You're thinking, "Hey, I'm going to go try to see if I can hook up another few projects, line up for get the year going." And then all these animation people would come rolling in, and they would just portfolio, hunt, and they would go, "Hey, you'd be really good for drawing props. You'd be really good for doing backgrounds." And they just pull out.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really fortunate though that I ended up not going down that route. I'm not an animation guy at all, and but I am, I love films, right? And so filmmaking. Live action filmmaking is my thing. So if I'm glad that that's where things went. That is what I'm the best at. So I was but I've never had anything to do with animation, not even by design. Literally, it's just never crossed my path.
So you said something not just about the Guggenheim, which made me realize something in that. You said oh, hey, I had to make up some stuff. And so you created this sequence, that you had thought about in the Guggenheim. And it's, it goes kind of in parcel to our talking about writing your own stuff and doing your own things, like that is a point where you said, okay, I need to tell the story that I need to tell that's going to sort of be the most interesting for me, but also probably showcase what I can do the best.
Yeah.
Because had you been handed a script, maybe if you had a script laying around or somebody you knew, someone like, yeah, here's a script, you would have had to hunt through that thing to find something that was going to be worth of, and will this show off what I can do? Because I remember that, like with doing samples, which you're saying doing that, like, they were like, oh, hey, here's a script, do some pages from a script. And I would look at the scripts and go like, ugh, these are horrible. And
no, I know.
So I'd write out a 4 or 5 page sequence of my own and then do the thing, just because I'm like, I don't like, why am I going to let somebody else dictate what I can do?
Totally. And I do remember I would make up those samples, those multi-page samples for comics and go around, especially after I moved to New York, I would go to the cons around there and show them to the editors and stuff. And I do remember getting, editors going, well, you could tell a story. You should be writing stories as well. I mean, that didn't happen in that world at that time, right. But I need the initiative of it. Oh, and just one other thing. Neil Posner sent me a 22-page Green Lantern comic script at one point for a book, for an issue that hadn't been published yet, as a kind of, here, pick some pages from this to do. And so I just drew all 22 pages of it and sent it back. So, because I was just like, I'm going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to commit,
Wow, okay.
I don't know that it was great, but it would have been a great job.
It would have been hilarious if you had hand drawn out an invoice receipt,
I was just like, look, I want to get someplace with this. I'm just going to go for it. I may have done that. I think I did that, an entire issue of Green Lantern and an entire issue of Suicide Squad that he sent me scripts for. Just as because I was determined.
Because look, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you have to kind of show you're like, how do I set myself apart? I've already have a dialogue. So my flashy, folders that I've been mailing in, they finally got through. They're opening up my mail. Now, how do I set myself apart from the next people? Because I'm not getting things back in the terms of money.
One thing you can do is make up a goofy name. That also was part of why I did it.
I almost came up with one in the mid 90s. Howard Porter and I were joking, and we came up with a character named Tex X.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be comics named Tex X.
That was actually the original title for Blazing Saddles. No, I'm not joking. The original script for Blazing Saddles was called Tex X. It was
no kidding.
That's funny. Before Mel Brooks got involved, Andrew Bergman, I think, wrote it. And sorry, I know too much about it.
No, but was Pryor involved in the rewrite of that?
Yeah, he was him and a couple of I think Norman Steinberg and a couple, there was a little writer's room of people.
Right. And then they just, I guess they didn't feel that he was the person who could be a lead vehicle, so that's why they got.
No, it was because he had a reputation of being a chaotic drug using nut job, which he was, but that was also what made him great, right? And so but then and that's why they ended up getting Cleavon Little, and I think Cleavon Little actually is the right choice.
Oh my God,
because he's so great. So
that was always a family favorite film, we would all anytime that was on television, everyone would just sit down and just watch that movie all the way through, because it was just
I just watched it again not that long ago, and it's great. It's undeniably great.
It's really one of my all-time favorite comedies, certainly in the Mel Brooks verse.
Mel Brooks runs out of steam pretty quick after that and Young Frankenstein, and
my mom
those are great. But
my mom took me to Young Frankenstein, and it was just just one of those great moments. She also took me to Star Trek One, the motion picture. So good mom.
Absolutely.
So all right, so the storyboard thing kind of comes into play, and you're kind of getting to mix your sort of your visual, hand storytelling with drawing that you love from comic books, but you're getting to now apply it to the cinematic universe of film, which I can see. You're mixing your two favorite things, getting to have pasta and ice cream at the same time. It's great. don't eat that. That's I wanted to say pizza and
Mhm.
ice cream, but for some reason pasta and ice cream.
One time when I lived in New York, and I had zero money, and it was before I got the comics gig, and I don't. It was maybe before I even got the. I think it was. I was in art school. I had nothing to eat. The only thing to eat in the house was, or in the apartment, was pasta, dry pasta, and honey. And so
Oh,
I thought, maybe this goes together,
maybe
and it didn't.
it didn't.
So don't. Yeah. I mean, maybe it does now. Maybe there's some way you can add some little extra thing to it, but don't.
Maybe we could. Maybe artists could work. Maybe we could do a collaborative book from artists called the Don't Cook Book.
Yes.
Of all the things that artists have tried to cook to eat because they had no money.
Yes.
This is just a warning label of just don't do
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to derail the question.
There's no digressing. I am all over the map at all times. So, okay, so it's exciting because I think you hang out with comic book artists in general, and there's a strong connection to film with lots of comic book artists, to the point where they're like, you would get some people who are like, well, I really want to be a director. I'm like, well, just go be a director. Stop.
Yeah, it's
here.
Yeah, right, totally.
Yeah. So, so you did really well, like quickly. It feels like you did pretty well right out of
the movie stuff.
Yeah.
You mean? Yeah. I mean, the way that stuff works is just you work on a show, a film. We call them shows, regardless of what they are, and we call film shows. And you just make connections with people, and somebody goes, somebody needs a recommendation for a storyboard artist, and somebody's like, hey, that guy on that one was really good, and you just get the next gig. But I also got into the to the union, which is now the Art Directors Guild, and I got in pretty quick, like compared to a lot of people. A lot of people spend ages working on non-union films trying to get into the guild. I again kind of lucked into it because the first movie I did was Austin Powers. It was a non-union movie while it was being prepped, while in pre-production, and so that's why I was able to work on it. And then it went union when they started shooting. So I was able to go to the producer Eric McLeod and say, hey, if you could report my hours, since this is now a union show, if you could report my hours to the union. That got me into the union, right? So it was there's no coherent way to get into a union, right? It's always some weird grandfather thing, right?
Well, did you wear that blue pair of underwear that you're supposed to wear every other Wednesday?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the fact that I got into the union so early gave me the opportunity to work on bigger movies, and and lots of people don't have that. So it was also a sort of a dumb luck thing that I got that, and then I had the agent for like a year, and then he was not the most reliable guy in the world, and I ended up just going after, like, he didn't quite realize that he hadn't signed me for real, right? Like for this whole time. And so when I got a job on terrible movie, right? Terrible movie, but it was a big movie at the time. Wild Wild West, right? This terrible late 90s movie. But like I went in and interviewed for that, and I negotiated my own rate up, right? And he didn't have anything to do with this because I was recommended by somebody I knew from the X-Files that I worked on. And then like all of a sudden he got very worried and wanted me to sign with him properly, and I was like, I don't know. And then he like got super drunk at one night and called me up and yelled at me. And then I was like, I definitely don't need to sign with you. And so I thought, well, I'll get another agent when I run out of work, And that was 1998. So I've never had another agent since then. So it's really just a question of, you make relationships within the business,
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's with most every business, but it's, because I think we all dream of the idea of having an agent, of somebody who like handles the business, and hands you the right amount of work for the times that you need it, and doesn't overload you, and
right. And I have an agent for other stuff, other movie business type stuff, but not to get me jobs as a storyboard artist. I don't.
Yeah. So I mean, like, what would you say are I mean, like, what are your strictures as far as storytelling? Like, what are the values for storytelling that you kind of consider the crucial elements? Because you have been called out by at least one guest on this podcast, totally unsolicited, that you are one of like the best storytellers and they learn tons from you. So, and like, so I mean, that's like, there are people out there who I consider phenomenal storytellers, and you are a great storyteller. But I wanted like, I've talked to a bunch of them, and I just want to know like what you think makes for good storytelling.
As far as good visual storytelling is concerned,
Yeah.
like I often say, well, look at what's happening in the scene. What's happening in the particular panel. Put the important thing someplace where people can see it. Like, like it's, yes, you should. Yes, this is all about nuances of composition and leading your eye through things and all that sort of stuff. And all of that is really important. But, and I guess I am sort of, speaking to the clarity thing here, but like, I do think that there are kind of just, you can get so far into the weeds of thinking about this stuff and process and
Yeah.
and everything, and to the point where you forget, like, just put the important thing where people can see it.
Sure.
Have things move left to right, like,
Right.
and have it, like, have,
Of course.
like, just like move their eye across the page.
Yes.
Move things from, like, don't put it over here, put it over here, because that's where your eye is going to go,
Yeah.
and and like, I think there are, and you get into different, I mean, there are radically different ideas about these things between films and comics, because comics are static, and we're having, and you have to do a lot of heavy lifting to make sure that people are looking the place that they should be looking. In
Right.
a film, it's being presented to you in a way where now you're seeing one image at a time, and those images have to go together, right? Like, those cuts have to make sense, but but like, the difference between leading somebody's eye through a comic and leading somebody through a film are, it's a huge gap. They don't have that much in common in a certain way. In some ways they do.
Mm-hmm.
And the ways that they do are just the ways that you can use the composition to tell people where to look, and I mean, that is, as far as the visual storytelling aspects of it, that's what I think about the most. The other thing that I think about the most is doing, which is another road to not being popular, but like doing the minimum, like, I generally don't push the expressions of people. I want it to feel like there is, I want to express an underlying tension with the least amount of like bombastic stuff, right? Things will get bombastic. Here's another giant rule. Everything can't have impact, right? If everything has impact, nothing has impact. So like, just like, it has to be about that same kind of thing that Hitchcock was talking about in Hitchcock Truffaut, where in sequences, it's you're orchestrating, you're going, we're down here, and here's where the tension rises, and here's where, all of that stuff. Like, all those things that sound so simple are things that it's so easy to forget and get lost in. And I love that sort of orchestration of the way the story is told and the pacing and all that sort of stuff. But it is really one of the things that I always think about is the way in comics, how I express character stuff is to give less, right? Like, suggest that something else is going on inside their head.
Mm-hmm.
And, because it's the context that's telling the story. It's the juxtaposition of images, those, like, putting the two images together and creating the third idea. That's a commonality between comics and film, because that's what you're doing every time you cut in a film, and it's what you're doing from panel to panel in a comic. So like, if you have to be aware that you're not just spoon feeding information to people. You are saying, here's an element, and then you cut to the next element, but those two have to add up into something more.
Yes. No, I totally get it. I mean, because that's really, it is a layering, and I think like that's the unique thing about comic books versus film, is that that aspect ratio is the aspect ratio more or less for a film. you have infinite aspect ratios kind of available to you on a comic book page, which is that sort of X factor of storytelling, to be able to take, what you're doing here on this page with a long, establishing shot, which you can't do in film.
Mhm.
It's hot, a vertical shot, and then you can kind of like even pace, a little more information, cut, wider shot. I mean, like these are things that are because close up. So I mean, it's a really interesting way to kind of look at it. And conversely, like when you're going like, for this, like, you're moving your camera, like the character is moving through the camera here, and like how, so you're indicating the direction lines. Think, that's really clear, in your Inception, work, like, so it's,
that's a confusing, difficult thing to express story-wise. So clarity is important. But can I say one other thing about my approach to the comics?
Yeah, please.
That one of the things that people talk about a lot that I disagree with is that the only, like, the truest form of comics is when you're doing everything that a comic book can do, right? That you can put, you could use, that, and I actually don't have the greatest way to express this, but what I'm trying to do all the time is sort of boil things down a little bit, trying to like use the minimal amount of stuff like that, not go for it every time. Do, like, be relatively conservative with the way that the panels are laid out, and relatively conservative with the stuff, and just doing, a restrained thing, often restrained from the character point of view as well, until we get to the point where things can break open, where you can get to more dynamic stuff. Never do all that all the time.
Well, it's like cooking, man. Like, chili flakes are phenomenal, but if you put in the food when you're cooking it, everything is hot and tastes like chili flakes.
Yeah.
But if you sprinkle the chili flakes on after you've cooked it, well, now you're getting this sort of these hits of piquancy that don't that complement what you're eating. So I think that, like, in the storytelling process, if you establish a world where, there are no panel borders, or everything is exploding out of panel borders, and there's no gutters or whatever the things are, and there's no sort of grid structure, well, the reader isn't grounded. You need to kind of, and not saying everything has to be a calm, you can start off that way, but you better calm things down so you can let the reader sort of orient themselves. Film is the same way, writing is the same way. You need to give your reader, viewer, listener, whatever the person is, even structure. You need to give them some sort of point of view.
Yeah. And you need to be able to both use all of these things to manipulate people and be able to back off from them as well. And, I don't think that throwing everything at the wall, every tool is valid, and you can use anything, but throwing all of it at the wall all the time is not the prime form of something. It's being able to look at all of your options. And for me, my personally aesthetic wise, it's about pulling back and being a little bit understated about stuff so that bigger stuff can have impact.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like the storytelling principle of having, of varying your shots, pull back.
Yeah. Well, but just in that word varying, it makes it sound like there's something arbitrary there. And and to me, like, everything has every situation, every shot has a place it desperately wants to be. Right? Like, where the angle wants to be someplace, and that one place is the place it has to be. And that's telling that story. Right. And it's like intrinsically there. And you just got to know, you got to be able to look at a situation and go, this is where the camera has to be, and so, like, I think that's something that something that I remember, when showing my samples around to editors when I was, a teenager, was, less knowledgeable editors saying, saying you need to vary, not to me necessarily, but just to people in general, you need to vary your camera angles. It's like, that doesn't mean anything, right? Like, that doesn't mean anything like that. What you need to do is put the camera in the most effective place to tell that particular part of the story at any point.
Totally. And so, how I went to art school, and and they teach you all this storytelling. We have the Gene Colans and the Will Eisners and the Jory Land.
All the people I had that I wasn't able to learn from, but
Right.
except in like
teaching me some visual storytelling or whatever. But where I actually got that, what you're talking about, and what I had developed from that was when I first got to meet Michael Golden and work with him, is he said to me, he's like, listen, there are things that you need to tell in the panel. Every panel there's things that you have to tell. It's not a matter of filling up a page. It's a matter of having, telling the story and what it needs to be in each panel. Close your eyes and think about where that mini camera is going to be, move it around in your head at the angle that's going to show all the information that you need to tell for that panel.
Right.
And that, coupled with what I've sort of developed, was my sort of mandatories list. So every, if I did a cover, if I do a design piece, if I did comic book pages, everything had a mandatory list. What needs to be here? Don't put things there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So,
although you can still put a bunch of other junk in there for texture, and it is a way to to like manage the way people look at a page too. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, totally. But you need to keep whatever the mandatory list is in there, so that camera's moving along. So that way that camera moves along, tells a story around the characters and the action in the scene or whatever needs to happen. And that's what that is, what I feel is that strength when it comes to storytelling, and you employ it, what we would say is effortlessly.
Well, I mean, so, but also to go back to that Hitchcock Truffaut thing, one of the really crucial things in there for me was there were some things where they would just break down, each shot by shot through a sequence, right? Yeah. And Hitchcock talked about, I can't remember if he referenced Pudovkin in particular, or wait, what's his name? The Russian film theory guy who actually thought about this. But Pudovkin wrote a book called Film Technique that involves, this idea that the way that you can elicit emotion is about the juxtaposition of the images. The classic version of it is, there's a man with you can have a shot of an actor with just a blank face, and then you cut to a shot of a baby, and the viewer implies that guy is looking at the baby and going, oh, this is a sweet baby or whatever, right? And you could take the same blank face shot of the actor and cut to a shot of a nude woman, right? And then you'd go, oh, he's being lascivious or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the same shot. It's just that the thing that it's paired with changes, so the juxtaposition is different. Yeah. And that's something that I think about all the time, because it's you don't have to sell everything through the expression on the character's face or whatever. It's also about the juxtaposition of what they're interacting with.
Yeah, context is king. I mean, that gives us so much more to work with.
Right, but it's the way you can manipulate the context. I think is the thing.
Yeah, that's sort of like, advertising 101. You're how do we manipulate the audience into can we elicit a sentiment, feeling, emotion, or whatever. Yeah. And that's, what you're speaking of is exactly that point.
Right. But the units of storytelling particularly in comics are just, there's a page and there's a panel, and the panel, cut from panel to panel, and those, and the ability to juxtapose those images is something that I think maybe we don't think about enough. I probably don't think about it enough. I don't do it enough, right? And to get a third thing, like creating that third idea, the idea that the guy, is looking lovingly at a baby, or that he's a creep looking at a woman, those ideas are just created in the viewer's head. And creating that third idea is the thing that's so important, because it elevates it beyond just court transcripts or something. You're not explaining what's happening to people blow by blow. You are, you're engaging the reader in a way. And I always want my ideal version of everything is that the reader is meeting me halfway. They are, I'm putting this out there, but they have to work a little bit too.
Well, they're an act. I mean, that's the thing about reading. Reading is an act of participation. Unlike television, which is less participatory than more of a bystanding sort of activity. Film is more participatory because it demands you to pay attention. Television tells you what they're doing as they're doing it. You can kind of look away and they'll be telling you like, what's in this closet? You like, rather than just opening a closet, showing a reaction shot.
Yeah. Or there's a classic thing in Rosemary's Baby where we're not allowed to talk about Roman Polanski anymore, but I'm going to anyway, because he was an amazing storyteller, and and like in Rosemary's Baby, there's a scene where Ruth Gordon, I think, goes into another room to answer the phone, and the shot is framed in a way where you can't quite see her face around the corner, right? And everybody in the theater kind of leans over as if they're going to be able to see around that corner, right?
Totally.
And it's like the most brilliant way to like manipulate the audience, put them off kilter in a way that you're not aware of exactly, but is very effective. And so stuff like that I think about a lot too, creating tension in unlikely ways.
Everybody at that point, everybody is trying to eavesdrop. And
just see the little thing that he's not letting them see, right? It's not about clarity, presenting everything to everybody in the biggest, dumbest way. It's about, it's about measuring that stuff and about going like, people will get a little frustrated by this, and getting them a little frustrated because they don't see everything or know everything is good a lot of the time.
Yeah. Wow. That's super strong. And it's totally something like, I think in every respect, everyone should take a little bit of that and add more of that stuff into whatever work. Because I think there's a great value in, not giving everything, all the time.
Look, I also am a big Twin Peaks fan, right? So I may be a little guilty when it comes to enjoying things that don't give you everything, because Twin Peaks gives you almost nothing. So that's a whole other end of the spectrum. But still.
Oh my God, that show was like, you receive an envelope with a handful of images and words every week, and you had to slap them up on the wall to go like, okay, how does this connect to the ones that we've already seen? Like it was a real jigsaw puzzle of a show. And
but those frustrations, those things where you don't know, even in things that aren't well made to some extent, they can have elements that are open, that don't, even if they're not intentional, even if they're like, I was watching like, so I mean, I like Star Wars, right? There's going to be the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and I was like, okay, I'm going to rewatch these prequels, right? With a minute, right?
Yeah.
And so in the second prequel, the Attack of the Clones, there's a thing in it where like an old Jedi is referenced by name who we never see, and you don't understand his relationship to why any of the rest of things happen about building a clone army and stuff like this. And it's obviously just kind of a fuck up in the middle that they never were able to pay off this element of the movie. But there is a weird way where the fact that this is so impenetrable is the thing that I'm the most interested in this movie, right?
Sifo Dyas, right?
Yes, Sifo Dyas, exactly. Which it's like it can't be like they say that he was a real guy, but it also just sounds like Sidious, but it also is this. It's like there's no way to reconcile this, and that's the most interesting thing in the damn movie, because like it's not intentional, but it creates a kind of big question that you can't quite wrap your head around, and I like that in things.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Yeah, it's interesting. I love how you reference. Have you made it to the third one yet?
Yeah, I watched them all. There's things to like in the third one.
I enjoyed them thoroughly when they came out. Not that I loved everything about it. I really enjoyed them, as they came out. And
from this remove, I'll say this: I'll give George Lucas credit in those movies for he's trying to say something. He is trying to say something in those movies. And there's a lot of movies these days that are not trying to say something. They're just repackaging nostalgia. And he was not doing that. I'm not saying those movies are good, but he's making a sort of anti-nostalgia, series that doesn't deliver on the things you think are supposed to happen. Yes. And he's trying to say a big thing that probably doesn't fit in the world of Star Wars that well, but he's the guy who determines what Star Wars is. So he's going for it. So that's my defense of the prequels.
He laid the biggest bricks of the foundation of our generation when it came to these fantastic storytelling world's, and they're his Lego. He can do what he wants with them. I still my biggest beef with it was you blew the biggest thing in all the Star Wars films, which is Luke, I am your father. I mean, I'm not exactly the line, but blow it. You'd make 3.
Yeah. Although, nobody's obligated to, watch them in the order they came out, and then it doesn't get blown, that's a perfectly valid way to tell a story.
I think that's I think that's a legit way of doing that. Can we I want to just briefly talk.
Well, you don't want to just keep talking about the Star Wars prequels forever?
I think there's plenty of people already doing that job for us. So
oh my God, yes.
We could let it go on.
They're very angry and they're getting a lot of views on YouTube.
Yeah, I know. Maybe I've gotten the wrong racket when it came to YouTube. The problem is I like all the stuff. I'm like I don't have time to be angry about things.
Yeah, so me neither. Yeah.
So this is one of the most complicated sort of camera film scenes in quite a long time. How did it come across to you, and what were the particular challenges in creating this, the visualizing this out for you?
Well, working on Inception, I mean, that was the first movie I worked on with Chris Nolan, and so it was, it was really just about, so in the world of these movies, it's almost unheard of to actually have a finished script when you start, right? Yeah. This doesn't happen that much. It's just an unfortunate reality of everything. On the Nolan movies, there's a script when you start, and that script is more or less what's going to end up being the movie. And it's a big production. Things change along the way to some extent, but that's basically the blueprint for everything. He also writes in an incredibly spare way. So you're not getting an enormous amount of context out of the script. And so it's just a question of going and meeting with Chris and talking about them. It was a lot less about him. He did not give me a lot of really specific shots. And as a matter of fact, for most of my career as a storyboard artist, it has not been about directors going, I need a shot of this, I need a shot of this, I need a shot of this. It's about going, here's the script, or more likely in a lot of cases, here's an idea of some big sequence that we want. And, and that I go off, take a shot at, design, present to the director, who will then make changes to it, right? And so with Chris, it was just about going in and meeting with him and talking through the incredibly complicated elements of the story of Inception, and trying to get a handle on that. Then in my job, and particularly for some reason, for many movies, especially since then, I've been the only storyboard artist on something. So it's not really been a team necessarily. Usually I'm just my own department. So I talk to the transpo guy about what kind of truck it is. I talk to the art department about this. I talk to whoever about, and try to get the best picture I can of what I'm working with. And, so that I'm using those things and I'm representing what's really going to be able to be shot in the best way possible. Right. Yeah. So and in this stuff, most of the complexity was just about coordinating all of those things and talking to Chris about what he was after, because even though the script is very set, it's often so sparely written that you're kind of going, what, there's not a lot, there's not a lot to go by as far as what's in the world of it and what's, it's the minimal amount of action description, and dialogue. So, which I don't think that's a bad way to work at all. And I write that way maybe not that spare, but in a relatively spare way myself. But But yeah, it's a lot about coordinating between all these different people and departments, and then taking a shot at stuff, showing it to the director, and making adjustments.
Huh. It's interesting. I mean, because I mean, it's I think that's a really valuable thing for people to be aware of. When you're working on whatever the project of the thing you're working on, don't be so siloed into it in your own sense. Like, there are other people involved in this thing. Speak to the people, and
Oh yeah, well, filmmaking is a giant collaborative,
huge.
machine, or it's like a war,
Yeah.
And so it's if you're not, I mean, probably part of the reason I've just been successful with this stuff is that I really understand filmmaking really well,
Yeah.
right? And and I'm able to to take in all those different parts of it, and I'm not there's a thing where you can be kind of like a petulant, whiny little storyboard illustrator or somebody sitting over in a corner doing this stuff and just resentful of things, and and feeling like you're not whatever. I just always approach it like, this is a team. I'm part of this. I'm gonna like, whether or not they like it or not, I'm gonna interact with everybody and get all the information that I need.
Well, and I think, I mean, it's sort of, to tie that up, I mean, it kind of goes to 2 points of you and what you've talked about. Is one, it's the kid who opted to draw 2 full comic books, when handed a script. So you're going full tell, and it's also the writer in you that writes a full script to eliminate the sort of the downstream effects that could cause problems. Like, less rocks downstream means less chance of the boats tipping over.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing this whole thing and then the transpo guy comes back and says, no, we can't, that's not the kind of vehicle.
Yeah, we have to get a different truck.
Right.
Yeah, we can't do this. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So now, are you screwing the budget? Are you screwing, like the whole thing? So like, to do that, it's like if you're designing something and it has to be printed, go talk to the printer.
Right.
Don't start designing, go like, hey, what can we do? Because you hear some ideas and they go, well, we could do that, but we could do it better if you did this. And then you go, okay, let me figure out how to make that work. So I think
there is, just not to cut you off, but there is an opposite version of this though, because I'm I just worked on a movie for 2 solid years, the longest I've ever worked on anything. Wow. And all through the pandemic, like, it started the week Los Angeles closed down. So and I finished 2 months ago or something like that. So almost 2 years. And like, there is an element of working on these things where the fact all these other departments have a budget, right? Like, and they are fighting for their budget. The art department, everybody is fighting for their budget and trying to get, to spend less money on things, but get the desired result. And so they sometimes push for less ambitious versions of stuff. I am a department of 1 who reports to the director. I don't care about their budget, right? Sure. So I'm going to push for the thing that is more ambitious and not care, because I don't have to pay for it. So like, and if that puts them in a difficult circumstance, that's, that sucks. But I mean, but it's still that my intent is always like, what, obviously I'm working for the director, but I'm always just like, let's do this thing. Like, there's a thing from Logan, the movie Logan I worked on. Yeah. Where we went for the reshoots. I went back, and there was a part at the end that was a little messy, and a tree falls on him or something, and everybody was like, what are we gonna, how do we fix this? What do we do within the constraints of what we can do? And I was just like, I was in the meeting with everybody, and there's a big giant truck, and there's a character who could, in some superhero way, pick up the truck and throw it. And I was just like, these are the elements we have. Pick up the truck and throw it on him. Picking up the truck and throwing on him costs $750,000 or whatever, right? But I'm like, just like, that's the creative thing to do here. That's the right creative decision here, right? Yeah. And and then wherever it goes to it. I'm not saying it's my idea or that I'm not taking credit for anything. But but like like, after that, people who, one of the producers who worked on the movie always is like, you're the guy who made us spend all the money on the truck. you know, like, like, so, like there is an element where you can kind of be the person who advocates for more ambitious things because you feel like it's the right storytelling thing to do too. Yeah. So it's not all just about, being a strict collaborator.
No, I get that. I mean, I have a great client that when we're dealing with other clients, like I say to these other clients, I'm like, part of my job is to like spend all this money on whatever's going to be on the floor, like whatever's going to be made. Like I want it to be as amazing and as powerful as possible. And that costs money. Like it's hard to get away with, something to wow people that's cheap, and you just go, and so my client, I'm like, hey, like, sorry, but that's what I sold through because this is what they love, and then it becomes a discussion about how do we solve this problem. But yeah, I get it, man. It's a magical game of like, compete with my animation or my imagination that costs nothing.
Yeah.
Now make it real, that's fine, but in the end result, hopefully the great thing is that amazing things are made, from these.
Yeah, and it's these tensions working against each other.
Sure, it's
like are important as well.
That's why the Police are one of the great bands, because there was this constant tension. Three people who are so good trying to fight for some sort of vision. And that's what you get. So and multiply that by like 700, and there you have a film. So it's great.
Right.
So what can people like? What do you have stuff coming out that people can see?
So, like I said, I spent 2 years working on that film. It was
comic books.
It was, it was a weird situation for me. I've never spent that long in a film, and I, in a lot of ways, I had spent years kind of balancing out working for 4 or 5 months on a film, and then spending the rest of the year on comics and stuff. So I'm back to working on comics now. I've got a couple of projects that I'm working on.
Good.
But
are you writing them?
Oh yeah, these are things that I'm only doing. Like, it's all me, right?
Sure.
So writing and drawing. I also have the one small thing that I have coming up is there was this Kolchak the Night Stalker comic that so like they did a Kickstarter for it, and I had agreed to do like a story for it if they reached some stretch goal. They did. They made a lot of money off of it, and so so I'm finishing up. I wrote and drew a Kolchak story, which is just fun, and it was like a 10-page story, so which was super fun to do. So I'm just finishing that up now. Like that, that'll come out in that anthology, will be super fun, and and then I have some graphic novel projects that I'm working on that, when I don't have I'm not even going to pretend to say when they're going to come out. They're going to get done when they get done.
Definitely 2024.
Yes, but I'm also, but right now I'm also really seriously trying to develop things for me to direct, and I'm writing a screenplay in conjunction with the production company and stuff. So like I'm working on some other film stuff to try to get that stuff going as well. So I'm just trying after all of the pandemic stuff and lockdown stuff, and working on that film for so long, which was a great experience, and I very, it was with the same director as Logan and Ford Ferrari, and we're getting along, and Jim Mangold, and I get along well with Jim. He's great, and so but like that was a lot of effort and work into that thing where I didn't have the space to do personal creative stuff. So I'm taking the time right now to really work on all that.
That's exciting. Well, I mean, I best of luck with the production stuff. I hope everything clicks.
It is always a question but it's and all that stuff can fall apart in an instant, and but still it is a huge ambition of mine to make films. It is an important thing for me. So that's but at the same time I have the ability to do the comics, and I'm working on those at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, I hope we get to see some news of positive stuff in that regard, and it would be great. It would be great if you are limited in doing your comic book work by trying something completely new in the world, and that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Are you doing any conventions, or are you
not? I don't have anything lined up, because I just feel like when I have a new book, I'll do a convention, right? I don't have a reason to go just hang around and do sketches or whatever, and and just have a table. I'll do it when I have a purpose, and the purpose will be having a new comic.
I think that's a very healthy response to it. not so much an ego-based response, but more.
Well, look, I mean, yeah, I get that it's nice to do it and have people come up and say they like the work and all that stuff, and that's great. But I do have a certain amount of discipline with this stuff, and I do feel like, especially right now, the important thing for me is just focus on getting the creative work done.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Well, just follow Gabriel at Gabriel Hardman at Twitter, and you'll be like.
And also Gabriel Hardman art on Instagram, where you more or less just see pictures of my dog. But whatever.
That's cool. I mean, if I had a dog, I'd put my pictures of my dog up there too. So there you go. Yeah. Well, are you cool? Is this good? You happy?
Yeah, this is great. This is a great conversation. Yeah.
Let's wrap it up and go home. Or if you're already home, I'm already home. What the hell? Gabriel, thanks so much for joining us, or me, just me. Yeah. Everyone else who's joined in to listen and watch and however they take this in. Smoke signals, cool. Like, follow, subscribe, etc., and so forth, yada, yada, yada. Take care. We'll see you soon, everyone, and be good.
Thank you.